I have the pleasure of introducing Cy Hersh. I've known him a long time, and you know his biography, so I won't recount all of this. New York Times, New Yorker. He made a name for himself with a book on My Lai. If we fast forward to the last few years, he published a very important book, Chain of Command on Abu Ghraib, which demonstrated, I think, the failure of the chain of command. However, Cy, I was wondering, this is what we know about you, but what's your real impact, and how could I communicate that to the audience? And Cy knows this well. Some of you know it, that I travel in more than one professional world, and one of those worlds happens to be the national security institutions in Washington, all of them. And I know that when Cy Hersh zeroes in on one of those institutions with a call, it shakes the place. They lock it up. They lock up the doors, and they lock down the whole place. So, and some of these friends doing the lockdown are my friends who don't like you, by the way. But I think it's a pretty important indicator of his effectiveness. And in a democracy, we need guys like him, even though friends of mine would maybe think otherwise. So I'm happy to invite you back to Tufts University and to let you know that I think I speak for the leadership of the university when I say the door is always open here. So please welcome Cy Hersh back to Tufts.
I did spend it's the caliber of the. If some of you didn't see all of it, you missed something. There was a lot to learn. I guess inevitably there is the inevitable elephant in the room, and the way I can get to it is just by telling you that the bad news, folks, is that by my count there's 724 more days left in the reign of King George II, and the good news is tomorrow morning there'll be one less day, and that's where we are. And it's interesting because I heard all this very sophisticated academic conversation about where we are in terms, and a lot of the tough points were hit. A lot of talking about Pakistan, a lot of talking about the Israeli issue. There's never enough, as far as I'm concerned, but we all have to survive. But here's the ultimate problem that we have in the country, and it's a very depressing one. I come to you as somebody who does live in the world, not of academics, but I live in the world of unhappy people in the bureaucracy and people who love their country. Most of them voted for George Bush. In fact, probably all of them did, maybe not, but and who are in the system and want to stay in the system. They think there's going to be life after 2009. They have a career. House, dog, cat, mortgage, all those things that make people not want to go public. And I wouldn't tell any general to go public anyway. Fox News would kill him, and the other Main Street, the main press would run away. So going public is never an answer. And also people in the military have a tremendous sense with the war on that you don't go public because you have boys in the field. And so there's a lot of, it's a quiet sort of business, and it's also in the intelligence community. But here's my guess, and I don't know what happens at the level I'm talking about with Bush and Cheney. None of us really know what happens. But my sense of this government, writing about it critically for many, many years, is that essentially you have to go back and in the way I look at it, in the Cold War. Many of you were too young. When we were growing up, in my generation, college, late 50s, you studied the Soviet Union, you studied the Comintern, you studied Lenin, you studied Marxism, you really studied it, you learned about it, you read the Gulag, you read Solzhenitsyn, you had all sorts of different opinions. And one of the sort of disturbing things to me was when the documents eventually came out, it turned out Stalin was every bit as crazy as a lot of people told us he was, and we didn't always want to believe, some of us. Some of us thought it couldn't be that bad. Well, it was pretty bad. So you had a government, just to exaggerate it, but just to extrapolate maybe in terms of Stalin's paranoia about, if you remember, he purged the KGB, he purged the Jews in the late 30s, and the doctors, all those issues he had. And so I can fantasize that the way it would work is he would get 5 people in the room, and they'd shoot 3, and by the time they got done shooting 3, the other 2 would say, yes, there's a conspiracy here. Yes, you're right. And that's basically the way the foreign policy is run of this government. It's really sort of scary. Well, the way it works is you can write a paper, you can be in the community, you can write a paper, do an 8-month study and using national technical means, using very sophisticated stuff, and don't kid yourself, we can be very good. We can be clumsy too, but we're also very good. I would disagree with the ambassador. I respect him for having the courage to come and speak at a conference, because I think what they did in the first days, given what the mission was in Afghanistan, was great. I guess you could look at it. 400 people, as he said. I'm not challenging the facts, but if you look at Afghanistan today, while he was talking, I made a list. Let's see, where are we in Afghanistan today? Oh, yeah. Let's see, the Taliban are still there. They're fighting mostly with the warlords. Drugs, it's the #1 supplier of drugs, hardcore drugs in the world. Karzai, our leader, if he walked 300 feet out the door without a bevy of guards, for a long time they were Navy SEAL guards. If he walked without the guards, he wouldn't last very long. Security's terrible there. All of the American units, the Red Cross, ICRC, everybody runs in convoys now. And of course, what else did Afghanistan give us? To our endearing shame, Gitmo, Guantanamo. The idea that you could put people into a prison on the basis of secondhand conversations, and that you would often pay for the information from various warlords about these people are al-Qaeda and these people are bad, and then off we go, lock them up, throw them in. And we will live with this. This will be our day of infamy. We're just getting to the beginning of, we don't really know very much even about how it all originated, what the laws were, how they were broken, what happened to the basic democracy. You know, countries, as you've heard here today, terrorism is a fact of life. It is. It's acute. But certainly Britain had it for 70 years, Algeria, Baader-Meinhof, somebody talked about Germany. And people have coped in much better ways than we did. And so you have a president, just to talk about Iran, about which I've been, I'd say probably obsessed. But basically, I for the longest time, for the last year, I would call my friends and say, it's Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. I happen to know, and I happen to know some of the things they say privately. That's all. And I can't always write everything I know, because for obvious reasons. But I write a lot of it. I will tell you, you can do a study. There's been a big study done. Our community, as I said, they're very good. Satellites, water samples, you name it. We can go in and we could do a lot of stuff on the ground inside Tehran. We're in and out. Israelis are also there. We share with them a great deal of this stuff. And they couldn't find any evidence that's significantly of a significant parallel, what they call a parallel nuclear weapons program. In other words, whatever Iran has, they've shown us. They've told the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, you all, I'm sure here know. You wouldn't be here if you weren't semi-aware, or pretty aware of all these words, these acronyms. But they've told the people in Vienna what they have, and that's what they have. And so you go and you give a briefing to the president and the vice president. It's the vice president I can talk about, not the president. And here's what you have. And he's very cordial, and he says, thank you, son, but I don't buy it. Just like he said to Wolf Blitzer the other day when Wolf Blitzer asked him about all of the hostility towards the American policies and the American policies in Iraq. Well, I disagree with you, Wolf. Or if you go back, I've gone back and read his interviews. The last one, the one that really was intriguing, was before the election. He did a long interview with Russert, in which it was, polls show you're going badly. I don't buy it. Or I disagree, or what you go. So basically what you have is a bunch of guys on the inside who, for whatever reason, are listening to their own tunes and making policy decisions. And we do have a revolutionary president. This is a president who does believe in democracy. I think that's one reason he likes India so much. It was a great democracy. I think what you see is what you get, which is a little alarming anyway. But the bottom line is they're immune, they're inured to what I can write, the New York Times can write, the world can say. They're inured, folks. Have your conferences. It's great to have them, and I learned a lot, and we all should. But the fact of the matter is, in terms for the next 2 years, we have a government that's pretty much going to do what it wants to do. Whether call him a lame duck, I don't know whether the president, I don't know anything about. I don't know whether it's because his father didn't do it. He's talking to God. Is this the next step in a 12-step program? I don't know. Take your choice. I don't know where it comes from. But where it is he knows what's going to happen. In private, he talks a lot about, I was saying earlier at lunch, he talks about what happened to Churchill. Churchill's a big man for him, and it's sort of the neocon, as you know, if you follow that stuff. Churchill's important. Churchill, who was kicked out of office after World War II to come roaring back, he thinks it's going to be, he's been saying this for a couple of years, 2-3 decades or more before he's appreciated, but he has to do the right thing now. And it's, the thing that's interesting about George Bush is he says what he says, and just there's nothing subtle about it. It's right there. The other thing in private, they talk an awful lot about they view the Shia and others as brown shirts now, and we're living in a world where it's probably 1938, and the Germans have taken Sudetenland, and they want Czechoslovakia, and they're on the border. And in the White House, this is some of the language that the answer is that if we don't do now, if we don't respond to, and the crisis in the White House is it's Iran. Whether or not we can demonstrate they have a bomb, we know they want a bomb, just like you could argue we know they had a bomb in Iraq. I do believe the president believed everything. I don't think that was a lie. I do believe it. I think when they're doing the mushroom clouds again on Iran, you see the public diplomacy for this government basically is right now it's defined as agitating to get the public more angry at the Iranians. Not that there's not a lot of issues there, but that's basically what they've been doing for 3 weeks. And, of course, the press is pretty much into it. In any case, I think their attitude is it doesn't matter what the facts are. We know they want a bomb. They're going to get a bomb eventually. When they get a bomb, they have the agents of influence will be Hezbollah. Hezbollah's in Palo Alto and Shaker Heights, and the Maza Galleria or the Galleria in Houston, whatever fantasy the president has, they're there and they can deliver it there. And therefore, what they're doing now, what's happening now, is really not about the region. It's really not about Europe. It's about us. It's about protecting America. And they really believe it. And if you listen to what the president said in the State of the Union, he actually said it. We're protecting you. We're doing this for you, and he believes it. There's also a chance he could be right. I happen to think it's, hallucinatory, but so what? It doesn't matter what I think. He believes it, and he is, in that sense, a truth teller. And so you really have to parse his words pretty carefully to get a sense of where he's going. He's not going to listen to Congress. Couldn't care less about what we write. You can discover anything. There's stuff going on now, obviously, as you heard, if you read between the lines, of very horrible stuff going on with American policy in terms of Sunni Shia. And, last time writing about it, so I can't get too much into it, but it'll be published soon. And there's all this crappy stuff in the black world, not Kofir black, but the black being classified. And so the worst is yet to come. If that isn't gloomy, I promise you I'm not selling uppers on the corner. And it's sort of like we're in a situation now where we're essentially powerless. We can just play it out. There is some question, will the JCS, one of my friends inside said last year was the revolt of the generals. The generals really did stand up quite a bit to the Pentagon, particularly on Iran planning. There was a nuclear option, and they did fight to get it out. But this year, they've been basically the president, which is his right, has told the national command, the commanders basically that you've made your objection. I've listened to it. I've taken some into account. I'm now going ahead with my planning. If you don't like it, you know what to do. Out the door. Otherwise, stay and do what I ask you to do. So somebody said last year was the revolt of the generals. This year it's the revolting generals. I don't know if that's too tough. It's very tough to be a general and the staff of a system, particularly under Rumsfeld. It could be better under Gates, but we'll have to wait and see. And so it may come down to the president making an order that the military will object to. It may come down to that. It may come down to because everybody says it's absolutely insane for him to go in. You heard that just said in the last panel. There's no reason for him to go into Iran. It would be devastating. It may come down to he won't do it. Common sense will prevail. He's getting tremendous pressure from the oil people because who knows what the price of oil will go to, where it will spike. But in terms of wanting, this is a guy who wants to leave office with the Iranian books clean. And for him, the only, he's a true, well, you got to admire him in one way. He's a total revolutionary. But, a total radical. Probably the most radical president we've ever had, just in terms of his definition of the policy, of the power of the presidency, et cetera, and also his foreign policy. But there's nothing more dangerous than a radical who doesn't have much information, doesn't learn new information, doesn't learn from the past, doesn't want to deviate from what he's doing. That's pretty scary. And so that's where we are. That's my horrible, my sort of heuristic, if you will, because it's not empirical. It's my fear that he's going to do what he wants, and not much is going to stop him. Certainly Congress. And also, if you look at the Iranians, I always think about, then you get to the Israeli question, because the Israelis are great advocates for pushing on Iran. And if there's and I just always play over in my mind when Prime Minister Omar of Israel came here last spring, this sort of marginal ambulance chaser that's not very competent, not very good, and sort of this weak president in this sort of strange, bitterly divided government that can't shoot straight. That's our partner, and which is alarming in itself. Never had such an incompetent mess as we do in Tel Aviv. But anyway, when he was here and he spoke before a joint session of Congress, the applause line that got everybody roaring was when he said, we have to take down Tehran, they can't be a threat. And then you have every Democratic, right now you have Democratic candidates, and I'm just telling you the way it is. They look to New York for money, and you know where that money comes from. And so you're going to see probably the Democrats basically be more in favor of aggression, as long as it's against Tehran, than even some of the Republicans might be. And that's just the political reality in an election year. Your money's there. It's in New York. And so, again, that's alarming. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. And none of this means it's going to happen. So these are all macro issues. So I thought what I could do, and I was just thinking all afternoon, what do you do in a conference like this? I think most of the great issues, just a couple of comments. One of the thoughts I always have is that I think Pakistan is really, truly very dangerous. I know some young Pakistani generals who have said to me, this is, again, out of the box, but these are Islamic Pakistanis who support the ISI and don't like Musharraf. I've actually been to a dinner in Rawalpindi when a bunch of young officers this was a couple of years ago, spent a lot of evening talking about killing the guy. I mean, this is right after the assassination attempt. So things are stable there now. And Richard and I have a debate. I've told Richard that one reason we don't do things in Waziristan, and I respect his view, but I'm going to say what I say anyway, Richard. One of the things my friends in the field tell me is we actually do know something about it. It came up a couple of times today. We know something where some of the bad guys are, the remnants of al-Qaeda, what there is. And again, about al-Qaeda, what we don't know about al-Qaeda is so much more than what we do know. We don't really know how the 19 work, how they did it. We just don't know. We don't know. We don't know how they communicate. We're pretty sure they are. I don't know whether there's a whole bunch of new Islamic, one of my friends said, don't call them jihadists, they're just terrorists. One of my terrorists, there's a whole bunch of new terrorist groups, part of the network that you're seeing now in Lebanon and you're seeing elsewhere. The network is spreading, and I don't know if they communicate with bin Laden. I don't know if there's some subtle way. I don't know if there's some web page they all look to. I don't know whether the network is reality-based or not. And I don't think anybody really does know very much about it. That's also interesting and alarming. But in any case, in the Pakistani thing is interesting me because these generals, what they say basically, their attitude is, hey, we know what you guys are doing. You're going to take down Iran's bomb, and then you're going to come after our bombs. How's that for a thought? We're not going to let you do that. And so if that's right, and you're the Indians, and you're very popular. The only country in the world where Richard Nixon has a plurality of popularity is India. He just gave him all that nuclear stuff, if you remember that horrible deal he cut, pushed through by Nick Burns and Condi. I'm Bush. I beg your pardon. Did I say Nixon? Huh. What an insult to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is, you know, it's funny. You think about Nixon. There was a lot of stuff that, anyway. Who knows what he would have done in the end. But I'm glad you're listening, because I'm clearly not. Anyway, to get back to the point about the Pakistanis, and I just think that the Indians, the point I was making is that I've been told that we do know where things are there, and this is all, I'm not writing this is all stuff I've been told by people in the field, in the special operations community. And essentially, India is very, very resistant to us doing anything more in Waziristan, because they don't want to have anything more to happen. They don't want the Musharraf destabilized. And that makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, there's a common sense yes to it. And I've actually asked an Indian about it, and there's no question the Indians do not want to see Musharraf. They want him there. They don't. There's too many bombs there, too many Islamists, and nobody's interested in more tension in that region that does exist. So that's all just different thinking. These are all big, huge areas of problems that we can't even focus on, because, you know, this is a White House that, you know, the old joke about Jerry Ford chewing gum and walking at the same time. They can't. So to get off the, I want to do some questions. So let me just tell you a couple of stories, because to get it from the macro, we've all been dealing in big, huge, horribly complex and interesting issues all morning and all afternoon here. To get to the macro, I'll tell you where I come down on some of this stuff. Being somebody who's I was an army man, I was a straight leg, I did all that stuff, and I remembered that in the military, the only thing that matters is your buddies. And so it comes down to, so let me just tell you about responsibility and how we in the press have really sort of failed you. You all understand we've missed the moral story. I mean, this whole war, in a sense, is a moral story. It's a moral failing. We've all really misconveying, but that's okay. That happens. You know, anybody expects the American press to lead a social revolution. We won't even know about it for 6 months. So that's an expectation not to have. But we did miss it. We all missed it. And so about Abu Ghraib, and here's something I always like to say, and I'll do this in a few minutes. We all know what the memory, the history is this. We go in, and, you know, we're an army that in 3 weeks defeated a 500,000-man Iraqi army, and in 3.5 years has not been able to defeat 10 or 15,000 insurgents, but that's another issue. You can think them all about that. But in any case, in talking about the limits of American force in a guerrilla war, in any case, we go in, we knock them down, we take over. My wonderful image of General Franks having his first big news conference, April 8th or 9th, to celebrate the victory in Saddam's biggest castle, what is now part of the Green Zone, and being served by, lackeys, and the American brass sitting there sipping coffee in Saddam's most largest and greatest castle and palace. And I remember thinking, oh my God, do they know what they're doing? They're declaring themselves the new viceroys. I mean, it was already, they didn't read it right in the first couple of days. And the other thing they didn't do is they didn't immediately tear down Abu Ghraib, which was the symbol of everything bad with Saddam. Sort of amazing. There were people that advocated both not do this and do other stuff. They have their victory. The president lands on the plane. We start mussing around. In the summer, we get some trouble. Rumsfeld starts, remember Rumsfeld? He starts talking about, what did he call them? He had a funny, dead enders, that's right. Yeah, good for you. Dead enders. He calls them dead enders. There's 5,000. They didn't get the message. About 5,000 of these creeps didn't get the message. The army's been disbanded. The Baathists are gone. It's all over. We've won. It gets worse and worse. And over the summer, it gets worse and worse. And then in August of 2003, some of you remember this, the UN gets hit. The Jordanian embassy gets hit. And that's where we interface with the Israeli Mossad. That's one of the places. In the Jordanian embassy, there's always been a long-standing, excellent, thank God for Jordan in terms of operating for us in the Middle East. Without them, we'd be lost. And that gets hit. So clearly there are people that know what's going on. The waterworks, there's some more sophisticated stuff that goes on. One of the things that happened after when we first hit Baghdad, if you remember, we expected door-to-door fighting in Baghdad. We didn't get it. And instead of thinking twice about that, we just celebrated. Meanwhile, and the NSA at that time, and this I know in real time from people in the American government, we estimated 6,000 to 8,000 or 9,000 people disappeared overnight around April 6th or 7th from Baghdad. Most of Saddam's special forces, his SSO, the SSO, one of his special groups that guarded him, elite Republican Guard units, and most of the senior bureaucracy. Most of the guys that ran the post office, that ran the hospital system, that ran the federal government, they're all gone. And if you remember, the looting was probably, if you wanted to think about it, more purposeful than we realized. The street people were taking TV sets, but there was systematic looting of all of the major industries and all the major federal offices, the State Department, the equivalent of their State Department, all of the documents, all of the marriage, all of the documents of day-to-day life, administrative life, licenses, tax records, deeds, all disappeared. The government was really set back just in terms of the day-to-day ability to function. That was all sort of, the odds are very high. It was much more systematic, much more planned. I'm giving you an alternative theory of what happened. They went to ground, and always, whether they had the plan in advance, like I'm told they did, I'm told we have captured documents that indicate they were talking, there was stuff like they were planning in advance, Saddam knew we were coming or thought we were coming, and prepared for it. Set up at least 3 different groups of cells, separate cells. One of them is still operating, the leader of one is still running around. Set up cell. We did a good job knocking out. Don't think we're not competent. We've got guys that have really learned how to fight guerrilla wars and wars of terror. We got a lot of young officers. If we can get through this mess, we'll be very competent. We'll be knowledgeable about networks. We'll be able to be, and the more they've seen of combat, the more they don't want it. The more they want to do stuff to avoid it. So that'll be a plus in the long run. I'm not denigrating the competence. It's just, you can't, what can you do? It's such a big mountain to climb. And so in the summer, by August, it's hitting the fan. In September, there's a lot of panic, literally, because election in another year. They bring back a guy from India, Robert Blackwell, the ambassador, who was close to the president, liked him for some reason. I used to remember why, but I don't now. There was some meeting. And he's brought back to take over the war. This is in September of '03. And one of the things is we don't know what the bad guys are doing. They're being told by the American intelligence community, the neocons, the conservatives who wanted to run the war, who thought they could make out with the Shia. These are the more or less pro-Iranian Shia. You could argue the Skiri and even Muqtada Sadr. There were no illusions about where the connected was. They were obviously a connection to Iran, but the assumption was they'd be nationalistic enough, to run their own government, particularly if we're going to give it to them. Meanwhile, in the community, the American intelligence community is saying, we listen to these insurgents, and they're diddy-bopping. And these guys, Iran's in there. We're listening to Iran. They're using Iran communication stuff. We can hear the beep, beep, beep. We can't figure out what's happening. So we know there's a problem out there. It's September. We've got a lot of intelligence indicating Iranian involvement. Nobody wants to deal with that. What we need to do is we need to find out what the insurgents are going to do we've got to hit them before they hit us. No more UN. Got to improve the quality of the intelligence. Bambo, bringing this General Miller from Gitmo, where they're just jumping around on people. Bring them in. Let's get tough. Got a lot of people. Let's get Abu Ghraib going. Let's jack it up. Out of this, it's complicated. I'll make it quick. Out of this begins the fun and games, the night games, the pyramids. I can tell you, I've done a lot more work on who knew what and the cover-up. It's just in the priority of things. It's a story. I'll do it one of these days. I mean, I know a lot more about it because I talked to a lot of the people involved. But the number of people who knew what was going on and thought it was stupid too, but and also thought maybe they were getting something good was enormous. I'm talking about the upper reaches of the military, not in Washington. Nobody in Washington. The president didn't know. That isn't the point. And so the games began. A kid named Grainer. Is that right? Yeah. Grainer goes in January, gives a CD to the cops, the Army CID, which Criminal Investigation Division, enlisted men who dream of getting officers. I mean, that's some people, I would always think the neoconservatives dream incontinence. The CID dream of getting officers. Anyway, and so they turn it in. Investigation begins. They turn it over to a guy born in the Philippines, Antonio Taguba. He's on Rumney's staff, 2-star general. He starts going at it. He doesn't like it. He's a Filipino. Doesn't like it. It's just too ugly, too racist. And I would just say to you, I always like to say this, that you want to talk about American racism, I'll just give you a fact. that until Clinton bombed Kosovo in '99, when he did, he was the first president since World War II to bomb white people. Now, I don't know what to make of that. I'm just giving you a fact. You can mull about it all you want. Anyway, I always think about it that way. I know what I think about it, but I'm the guy that did My Lai and stuff like that. I have my feelings about it. Anyway, it's hard to generalize about things like that. But anyway, he wrote a report. It was hot. And he was put on notice by the middle of January. Within 3 weeks, he was saying, this stuff is bad, it stinks. And he was already being told, you know, you got a career ahead of you, buddy, whatever it is. And so he comes, and this is January of '04, and he brings it into the Pentagon. Nobody wants to touch it. I mean, nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to look at it. It finally gets to Rumsfeld, and let's go ahead. It's now May. In April, CBS had done photographs, I'd done stories, having the Goober report and other stuff for the New Yorker, a bunch of stories about covert operations, special access plans. So these stories are all out in late April and early May, and, you know, it hits the fan, and the president says, I'm against torture, always been against torture. Condoleezza Rice says, she literally said at a briefing, we told the Army that we're against torture. I guess they didn't get the message. That's literally what she said at a briefing. Panic in the White House. She's sort of a panicker anyway. And she is. I mean, you know, that's all right. It's not because she's a woman, because she's just a panicker. Anyway, I don't want to get in trouble with my daughter. So Rumsfeld's testifying, May. I think the networks, it was a big story. Certainly PBS and C-SPAN, but I think the networks were doing, it was, you know, afternoon testimony. And he's describing the events, and he testifies before John Warner's committee. John Warner's sort of an interesting old royalist. If you notice, he did the right thing. He always ends up, he's an interesting man. I like him a lot. He's just a little old and addled, but he's a good guy. And he came out on the right side. He wanted to do it earlier, but he just didn't. Anyway, he's testifying, and he says, well, yes, he said, Rumsfeld's testifying, and he says, yeah, around the 24th of January, I get this report, and 2 days later, I briefed the Pentagon on it. And the president, I go brief the president. Did you look at the pictures? Well, I don't remember. I don't know. I didn't look at pictures. I don't think they're pictures, but I gave him a full briefing on it. He goes on, and I'm sitting there, and I say, oh, wacko, we just did it. This is going to break it. Bush told about Abu Ghraib, late January. Rumsfeld testifies, empirical, no question, before a camera. Bush told this, and what did he do for the next 3.5 months until it became public? Nada. You want to know chain of command? You want to know responsibility? You want to know why no general wanted to look at this? You want to know why that they tried to get away with busting a couple little kids? It starts right there. He did nothing. And every one of those 3 and 4 stars knew, you push this one, you're pushing up against the hill. That was the moral leadership we had. That's where the buck ended, right there. It's right there. Not one newspaper wrote it. I don't think they saw it. Maybe it's passive information. I couldn't understand it. I've been talking about it. I mean, it's right there. What I'm trying to do now is get the actual report he was given. Got an outside shot. That'll help. Maybe it's just, I don't know what it was. Do you understand what I'm saying? Bush, between January and the next 14 weeks, until that story became public by people like me, and the 60 Minutes had it and was sitting on it until I knew I had it, and then they ran and did it, which is okay. I'm glad they did it. Very late April. Didn't say a word. Did he call General Miller, the guy they brought in? Did he call Rumsfeld and say, what the hell's going on? This is unbelievable. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know how devastating this was, how bad it was. I mean, there you are. Just look it up. It's May 7th. Testimony's right there. So, 2 other stories. As some of you know, 35 years earlier, I'd done My Lai. My Lai is the same thing as a way you got to feel totally, completely sympathetic to our kids. And I always believe that as bad as it is, even there, the kids we send are as much victims as the people they take action against, to kill or mutilate. They are victims too, because they're in a wrong war, wrong time, with wrong training. Not much motivation. Maybe in the beginning there was. There certainly isn't much now. And in this case, in My Lai, the company, 100 kids had come over, enlisted kids. They come over to Vietnam in late December, I think, of '67. Spent 3 months humping. They were sort of the dregs of the drag in a new division that had been put together with a bunch of leaders that nobody wanted. They were all officers nobody else wanted in one of the elite divisions. They were a new division called the AmeriCal, everybody's shoving pool. And they lost maybe 20% of their buddies. And what I said about buddies is important. You really love your buddies. And they lost 20% without seeing it. For 3 months, they walked around. Guys get shot by snipers. They walked into landmines. And they lose 20%. Not all killed, but many of them killed, a lot wounded. And they're mad. Finally, one day in March, they're told, tomorrow you're going to go meet the enemy for the first time. The analogy to Iraq is very obvious. You don't see, there's no enemy. And you're going to go. And they do what they did then. They toked it up at night. The officers and non-commissioned officers drank. They all had their drugs. But they got up and they got on the chopper at 3:30 to go kill and be killed. They did it. And they go out there and they walk into, and there's 555 people. That's the number, real number. And eventually they executed them, put them in 3 ditches, and they started shooting. A guy named Callie was responsible. There was a kid named Milo. That was one of he kept on putting clip after clip. A lot of the African-American, I used the words then, the black guys and the Hispanics in the company, about 40%, a lot of them, they shot. No way they weren't going to shot because they didn't want to get a bullet in the back from Whitey over there, but they shot high. I talked to a number of them and said it's just not their war. They just wasn't what they wanted to do. But these farm kids, bam, 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 they had the officer telling them that. Everybody knew what was going on. Officers were all over the place. At some point, they're in a ditch, and at some point, one of the kids crawls out. A mother has put a little child under her stomach, even though they went bullet after bullet they put them in ditches. They were sure they got everybody. They sprayed again and again. They had M1s and a semi-automatic. You had to pull the trigger, but 14 rounds, 16 rounds. I don't remember how many. But they just clip after clip. Meatloaf told me, and he told the world later that he fired, and other kids did. And so this kid comes up about a half an hour after they're done. They hear this keeling. Kid crawls up, and he gets up all full of blood, other people's blood. He gets to the top, and he starts running. And Callie says to Paul Meadlow, who'd been the most aggressive shooter, the one that didn't argue the least, plug him. And what I'm telling you now was told to me anecdotally, but also came out in the court-martial records literally the same way. And Meadlow couldn't do it, one. So Callie, at that time, officers had a carbine, a smaller weapon. And so Callie went up behind him and plugged him. So I'm doing this story. I pick it up a year and a half later. I'm doing this story. And I'm a freelancer. I'm beginning to peddle this story. Whatever you do to get a story out was not easy. And I worked at the AP covering the war. I'd been Eugene McCarthy's press secretary. I worked for Time, Life, written a big piece for the New York Times Magazine. Nobody wanted to touch this story. But it got out. Don't knock the press. It did get out. We got it. And after, I'm seeing kids one after another. Just a long story to get to. Finally, somebody tells me about Meadlow. It's repressed memory. What happened the next day to Meadlow is they were walking in a nearby field on patrol after that horrible day, and he stepped on a landmine, and his leg was blown off below the knee. And while he was waiting for the chopper, the medevac, to come get him, he began uttering a curse. He went like this: "God has punished me, Callie. He's going to punish you." It was a real dirge. He went, "God has punished me, and he's going to punish you. God has punished me, and he's going to punish you." All the kids kept on, as they told me about it later. Nobody volunteered when I first heard about it. Even people I'd interviewed that I went back to said, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think to tell you about that." Of course, it was a seminal event. And they get this guy out of here. And finally, the chopper came. He spent, by the way, somebody later, when I gave a talk years later, said he was in the hospital with him for the next month, and he never spoke, never said a word. In any case, so Meadlow gets out of there, and I hear the story, and I'm looking for Meadlow. So I got to find him. So this is before the days of Google and all these searches. And I knew he lived. I knew how to spell the name. It was Meadlo. I knew I could find it. Southern Indiana. I find him below Terre Haute, some little town. Call up. It doesn't matter. I just call up exchange after exchange. I'm in Salt Lake City at the time, and I'm just chasing this story. Obsessed might be a good word. Transfixed, transmogrified really is the best word. Anyway, I was some other creature. And so I'm chasing this story, and I get his mother on the phone, this southern rural voice. And I said, "I'm a reporter. I want to come talk to your boy about what happened." She said, "I don't know if I'll talk to you." I said, "Well, I'll be there tomorrow." So I fly all night, and I get down there. I have to go to Indianapolis. It was New Goshen, Indiana, which is below Terre Haute, which is below Indianapolis, which is below Chicago. The sort of the New Yorker map that I draw for you. Remember the New Yorker map, New York here, and everything is the rest. I get there, and when I get there, it takes me hours. I couldn't find the guy. It's a chicken farm. It's not Norman Rockwell's beautiful, pastoral scene of farm life. This is really grungy. This is no man around, chickens running all over, no screens, dirty shack. The house is there. This old lady comes out when I pull up. She's 50, looks 70, wrinkled. This is hard life. And I go out and I say, I'm the little ratty suit. And I go out and I say, I'm Hersh. And she says, "Yeah." Well, I said, "I want to speak to him." She said, "Well, he's in there. I don't know if he'll talk to you." And I said, "Is it okay?" And she said, "I don't know if he'll talk to you." And then she said, She said to me, this woman, she said, I gave them a good boy, and they sent me back a murderer. Okay? Flash forward 35 years. I'm doing Abu Ghraib. I'm doing this story about this horrible, there was a company of kids there, the 372nd Company, that was the group that did it. They were trained as military policemen. They were traffic cops from a rural West Virginia Army Reserve unit, or National Army Reserve, not National Guard. They were there. One ran a pizza shop at night. There was one of them who worked at a corrections officer, Grenier, the guy that got 8 years. Most of them were working in the reserve because they wanted to get a little money so they can get ahead, not to go to university, just for life. It was tough, hard scrabble, Virginia, West Virginia, rural area. God knows I'm not suggesting they weren't as bright as anybody. They certainly weren't as educated and weren't as sophisticated. They go there as traffic cops. They're reassigned to go into this operation, and they're there. And so I'm doing these stories. I did 3 stories in 3 weeks. If anybody knows anything about the New Yorker, that's impossible because you just can't do it. The fact-checking, the grammarian. The last person you deal with when you're closing a story is the grammarian. And you have to have a talk with her about parallelism, comma faults. What do you think? Should we do the commas this way? And I really am worried about the parallelism here. Does it take an it? And you have to sort of be calm because that's the New Yorker. I'm not dead serious. It's just as important to them as the core. So you get through all this stuff. It is pretty funny, except she's great. And sometimes it makes for awkward sentences, real grammar. But that's the way it goes. To the contrary notwithstanding. I mean, I don't want to get idiomatic usage, but it's a constant struggle. Well, you guys, I want to write English, I once, when I first joined the New Yorker in 1970, I'd done the My Lai stuff as a freelancer, and William Shawn, the famous William Shawn, hired me. And I was doing a story, and I did another story about the war called The Reprimand, one of those, I liked it a lot, one of those, it was reprinted 100 times. It was a story about more trouble. But my first proof I sent to Shawn, and, I hadn't worked for the New York Times. I was 30 years old. I was just a kid. Here I am working for the New Yorker, this sort of famous place. And he read the first proof, and I got it back. And on the third galley, he had circled a cliche. And I swear he wrote in his little handwriting, Mr. Hersh, please use words. Which is, for all of you teachers or instructors, let me tell you, what a thing to do. Start going through and just say, use words. You don't have to say in the wake of. Just use words. There's other words. Anyway, it doesn't matter because the other day I used in the wake of thinking about it. It's a horrible cliche, but I wanted to get the idea done. You do it anyway. Sometimes it pays off. So 35 years later, I do these 3 stories. In between, I'm doing my thing for the New Yorker. I go on radio and television and do the stories, and that's the time I do it. It's the only time I like to do it. I do it. And I'm on some NPR show, and a woman calls up, and she says, I had a kid in the unit, and nobody will talk to me. And I tell her on the phone. I give her my phone number. I said, got a pencil? And I said, call this number. And I knew most people don't listen to the afternoon radio on NPR with a phone, and so I only the couple crank calls. The radio station's got a lot, but it didn't matter. She called me 2 days later, and I go see her. And here's the story. She's got a kid in the unit, Abu Ghraib, right there. Woman, young woman, attractive girl, was married about a year. Her reserve unit gets called up. They go, and she comes back in March in 04. 2 months. Nobody knows about Abu Ghraib. It hasn't been announced yet. The Army's investigated. She's not telling anything. She's completely different. She's sullen. She's withdrawn. I actually was an ethical dilemma because she was probably clinically depressed. And, how much do you intervene? I want something for them. I want something from her. Do I intervene in that way? Do I make it harder? Do I change my relationship with him? I'm advising a mother to get her into a psychiatric setting quick. That's all sort of, you do think, some of us do anyway. I do. I think about those things because it does change the relationship. Like hitting on an intern. There's some things you just have, there are certain things you have to worry about. So anyway, that's not an apt analogy. It's just one that came to mind. So anyway, so she comes back totally depressed. Nobody knows what to do. A couple weeks later, out comes Abu Ghraib, big pictures. The woman, I'm not talking about relationship. The woman goes to this kid. She's moved to another city, taken a night job, left the family, left her husband, completely changed everything, and just moribund. And she goes and she's telling me this that day. I drove somewhere the next day to see her, somewhere in the Northeast, and she shows a picture of one of the major newspapers, or any newspaper, because it was a huge, big story, all the photographs. And the girl slams the door, is this it? And at that point, the woman who's talking to me and who's upset about it, lower middle class Catholics supported the war totally, completely against it at this point, completely against it. And, we are educable in America. I mean, the election shows it. And so at that point, it turned out when the child went off to the war, the child was given a portable computer with a DVD. It never occurred to me. Everybody has one because you can watch movies. You can, that's why not? It makes sense. You can watch movies. You can play solitaire. You can do what you want, which one reason explains why the DVD was so much, they were using and passing around DVDs. Everybody did it. And so at this point, she remembered then when the kid came back, she had been given a computer and she left it in the house. When she went and moved somewhere else, her night job was menial. She didn't need a computer. At that point, she swears to me it wasn't the unconscious. I told her she better start reading a little Freud. But anyway, she said at that point she suddenly remembered about the computer and she opened it up and she was deleting files, she said. She was just going to take it as a second computer in her office. She worked as a clerk in an office. She had some job. And there's a file she's deleting, and there's one called Iraq, and she hits it, and out rolls 80 pictures. And something no adult, mother, child, whatever, nobody should see. It's the one the New Yorker ran was this iconic picture of the guy, the prisoner with two dogs 3 feet away, naked. He's got his hands here. He can't even put his hands where he wants to put them. He's got to put them there. And he's got two dogs. Well, in the sequence, the dogs attack him. And it's bloody. And it's beyond belief. And so at the New Yorker, what do you do with this? I get permission. I have to get permission. I also have to let her know that she's got to get that kid into some sort of help. It's all very complicated, but we did everything the right way. The kid had to agree to it. It's her pictures. And so the New Yorker's concerned, believe it or not, this is dynamite. And I had a story I was writing anyway about Rumsfeld's secret activities. This all was authorized at the top, of course. All of this stuff was not, Rumsfeld wasn't responsible for what happened in Abu Ghraib, but he's responsible. And with the president and with other guys, a guy named Cambone, all the guys, some of the guys in the intelligence, there was a lot of stuff being run in this government that we don't know much about. Anyway, and so the issue for the New Yorker was, how much do you humiliate the Arab man? And you heard the word humiliation today a couple of times. Some of you were at the conference, and that's a very important thing in terms of the anger. Yes, I know there's jihadism. I know there's also this sense of humiliation. You have 40 years with the Israelis in Palestine, the mistreatment. I do think, although people can disagree, many do in the White House, the people in the White House, there's a group of people that don't think the Palestinian issue has anything to do with it. I think they're wrong. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we decided, we ran this one picture, not the rest. I told a little bit about it in the story, but it just was enough. And so life goes on. I got permission, story runs, everything's pictures all over. 5 or 6 months later, I'm in the area speaking at a college, and I'm still in touch with her. She comes, he says, stop, I'll do it one more minute. You'll see where I'm going. And she says, she comes to see me, we have dinner, and then she tells me this, and this is really the last thought. She says, I didn't tell you one thing about the child when she came back. When she went off to live by herself, she said, every weekend she began going and getting tattooed, large, dark tattoos, black and blue. And eventually she filled up her whole body, arms, legs, everything, up to her neck, not the face. And she filled herself up with tattoos. And then this woman said to me, she said, it was as if she was trying to change her skin. Okay, so what am I saying to you? What I'm saying to you is, you will not believe what's going to be happening in the next couple of years with returning vets, because it's been a violent war. It's a war in which you're up against a population. You can drive through a village, kids wave at you, you give them candy, and 100 feet later a bomb goes off, and you're mad at people. And you take it out. I don't think it's murder, but you take it out. The violence is high. Of course it is. Again, I'm not castigating. It's inevitable. This is war. This is a bloody, dark war, and against a civilian population in which the enemy is interspersed. And so you're going to have a lot of terrible things and people coming back with a lot of terrible baggage. And if you talk to people health commissioners and people in the health, they're already seeing some signs of this. And so, and I'm not even talking about what's going on in Iraq, because we have to get a good accounting of it. I mean, it's devastating. And nobody ever talks. The word today, one word that didn't come up today about Iraq is, where are the Christians? 2 million, they're gone. I think ethnic cleansing is real. It's done. It's a done issue. We can just salvage the pieces. Well, I talked too long. It's 7:10. I got to catch a plane. Richard wants me to do what? Okay, it's enough. We don't need questions, right? A couple questions. Let's do a couple. All right, we're overruling. Is that okay, Leila? Why? What am I doing? You're supposed to go to 7:15? 2 questions. All right, let's go 2 questions. Yes, sir.
We know the surge.
What?
Okay. We know Bush's surge is based
Wait,
on
wait,
David
wait.
Petraeus'
What's the discussion?
theories.
I want to know what the discussion is. What's the issue?
He's asked all the questions.
Did he ask a question already? Oh, well, he's in front of us. Okay, you can't ask the question. Let's go over there. Somebody have a question over there? Way over there. We practice democracy with a little d. Right here. Go ahead. There you go. Boy, it better be good.
Woo, that's pressure. I guess I'm concerned by the dismal way that you began this talk by saying that there's nothing that can be done, and that relieves all of us in this room of any responsibility to try and do anything. And so, I mean, perhaps we have an administration that won't listen to intellectual discussion and won't listen to reason, but perhaps what they do understand is power, and that there is something perhaps that generals can do that we, as the people who have the blood of Abu Ghraib on our hands as taxpayers, and as people who haven't been able to, muster up enough force to end this war in Iraq. And so I just want to turn that over back to you.
Well, I'm sorry. I just don't think we should live in the cave. Plato's Republic this is not. He's not going to respond, and there are limits, and I think you have to understand that. And we have to, what do you do then? Do you then decide you're going to invest more in demonstrations? Maybe there's one this weekend. I don't know if he's going to respond to that. I just don't know how you're going to shape him, because he's got. There seems to me a view of the world that excludes the world. And so I'm just telling you what I think, and that's all. I wish I could make it better. Of course I want, I'm very happy the Democrats won. I think they're going to do some good. I think they're getting mad a little bit. Anyway, I should go on. But look, let me recast it. Yeah, I think that maybe we should all write letters to the editor, and he's going to change his mind. Does it make you happy? Well, soldiers to stop going in the Army. Well, right now they go in the Army for economic reasons. Most of them, it's a social tool. If you go back to it's a social economic tool. If there's been a lot of studies done by Harry Moskos did them about 40 years ago, and it's still a social tool. It's a way, if you're Hispanic or you're in a lower class of getting ahead, you're Samoan. Virgin Islands, I noticed in the death list there was a bunch of guys killed in today's Times, I think it was, from the Virgin Island reserves. And so you're getting a lot of Samoans. Every unit has a Samoan. They're wonderful. They smile and they carry all the big guns. They don't speak English, but they're learning, and they want to get a green card. And so we're doing that. And if you ask the Army, they will tell you in terms of intellectual acumen that they probably, I think there's 4 levels of test score, 1 being the highest. There's more level 4s in active duty right now than ever. That doesn't mean they're necessarily dumb. It does mean a lot don't have the language, let alone Arabic. Don't have the English language, because many are probably from immigrant communities. We're an immigrant nation, and it's a step up. The Army is a step up. And, I talked to a Marine the other day, because the Marines really have a strong sense of in loco parentis. They really do. That's something they're really ingrained in. And you got to love the Marines. They're the toughest, and they're the smartest. And, when they were the most, when it came to opposing the policy in the early days, along with Shinseki, they were the most active. Some of the 4 stars and 3 stars. They were the most. They really were the most, because they know the most about what war is like, I guess. I don't mean, and by the way, the U.S. Army did shock the Marines by doing very well. The Third Army was just great. But before the war, they weren't sure how the Army was going to shake out. And one more, okay. But I just wanted to finish. What? Well, I'll take some more questions. All right, I can, 3 more? Leila, 3 more? How about 2.5? Anyway, but anyway, the point being that it's just an interesting time. And the Marines I know will say to me, look, we assume 10% are thieves, and we just do our best to stop them. And then I said, well, what does that mean? Well, there's a young kid. He went to the Navy Academy, and he was serious about what he was doing. And he'd been in the field, and he said, well, I work with them. I try and, you find some jewels. And that's part of the American process, in the military. There is that aspect to it. Right now, it's not. It works to the disadvantage of these young kids who want to get ahead by joining the military. It's a way out. And, look, if you've got a choice between the military and making, minimum wage at McDonald's, and we don't have very many good jobs left anymore, thanks to, globalism. The world is flat. So I don't know. I mean, it's very complicated, all these issues. Yes, I'll do a couple more. Yes, somebody here.
Hi, Mr. Hersh.
You're a staff guy. You work here. You work for these people. No, she's not a staff guy? I thought you were. Okay, go ahead. Ask your questions.
I'm a multimedia journalism student at Emerson College. How's that? I just wanted to ask, well, first of all, thank you for your decades of service to American democracy. One. Two, you said you were obsessed with Iran, so I was wondering what you thought about the idea that the deteriorating situation between the U.S. and Iran is a result not of President Bush and Ahmadinejad being polar opposites, as we often think of them, but actually being exactly the same.
Well, what'd you drink for lunch? No, I think the interesting thing about Iran is that although we don't like to think about it, they had a pretty interesting democratic election in which the slates that were opposed to Ahmadinejad did very well, because Ahmadinejad has failed miserably and probably was using the nuclear issue and the Israeli issue as a vehicle to prop up his popularity, because he's not delivered on many of the economic promises he made. He's basic, and he's held in a great deal of he's not liked very much, really, and certainly Rafsanjani's back end. And so I will tell you there are people in the White House, I'm going to say this with a straight face, that think one reason the election went badly is because our American covert activities were a factor. In other words, the CIA's operations there were a factor. They really believe that's the reason the election went bad. We've been deeply involved. They do. No, I didn't say I believe it. No, I say I don't believe it. We do stuff for the Azerbaijanis and the Baluchis and the Kurds. What I said to Richard, you can't rule it out, but most of my friends don't believe it. You think it's true?
No.
I don't think it's true. Oh, let's go. I didn't say I believe. No, I miscommunicated if I did.
Hi, I'm Kat Schmidt. I'm here with the Tufts Daily. My question is, you said that the American press failed America on Iraq.
We all did. I wasn't excluding myself because, I wasn't tough enough either.
How does one toe the fine line between hearing both sides of the story and deciding when not to buy a spin of a certain?
Well, that's a good question, because one of the things that didn't happen with the WMD issue on the weapons of mass destruction is I found it just so happened I did a lot of reporting on the UN the UN UNSCOM, the United States the UN inspection process. And I did a lot of stories about that in the late 1990s, because there were tremendous problems, because the UN was actually, in a couple of cases, the UN scored some intelligence breakthroughs, and there was a lot of tension between the UN people and the American intelligence community. They wanted to sort of run the programs, and so it was a good story. And because of that, I began to read all of the reports that they were writing. And the UN, I'll just take a second, the UNSCOM, the UN operation went from 91 to 98 of inspections. And by 95, 96, they were pretty much ready to give a clean bill to Saddam in terms of WMD. But then the other issue came. The Clinton administration basically wanted regime change, and that's why it didn't happen. But by 96, they were pretty sure it was clean, because we have a lot of our technical skill is high. Most people don't know it, but Baghdad used to be called, it was always sort of the jewel. It was arrogant about its cleanliness. It was the cleanest city, the jewel in terms of cleanliness in the Middle East. And they had very good, because of the connections with the French, very good Total oil is very big. They're a very big, strong French connection over the years. Great health care. And by the middle 90s, anytime there was a barium IG test, we could monitor the radioactivity in the effluent in the Tigris. We were that good. So we knew there was nothing cooking in the nuclear area. We just knew it. And there was a report written in 97 that was quite brilliant. And the UN team was interesting because it included, guys from the United States, Australia, Brits, Russians, Swedes, Italians, and half of them were good technical scientists who knew stuff about metallurgy and knew how to. The other half were hardcore operators, Delta Force, Special Forces, German Special Forces. The Germans have a black unit. Spetsnaz from the Russians, the SAS from the Brits, small boat people were even involved. They had incredible, half the guys were there, hunter-killers, in case the Iraqis made a move on the inspectors. So you had a combination of warriors and scientists. So it was fun to be around them and fun to report in it. And I read all the reports. And there wasn't anybody who wasn't familiar with all of the reports written by 97 and nobody who worked who thought seriously there was a significant weapons program. And so what the White House was saying was demonstrably untrue, at least to a significant degree, to a high percentage. You couldn't ever prove anything. And so that's one of the reasons I was skeptical, because the people I dealt with were skeptical. That's a reasonable basis for being skeptical, but I still, there was always an outside chance there was something, so I would caveat it, and that's what I feel badly about, but that's the way it goes. Last question, I think. 7, I got to catch a plane. What? That's it, last question.
When the Iraq Study Group report came out, Time magazine did a cover, and the headline was, "Why Bush Will Listen." And that's this year, or a couple months ago. So the government is the government, and we have elections and such in the government, but what can we do as citizens when supposedly reasonable media outlets like Time...
Well, no, Time believed they just wrote what they thought Bush would listen. They were getting that spin. I'll give you the other spin. Inside the White House, they're ecstatic. They have kicked the crap out of that report. They think they're great. They've done 2 things. They took down the report. Whatever their PR game was in the last month and a half, they've diminished the report, and they also diminished all the calls they believe for talking to Iran and Syria. They think that's been lowered. Goodbye, guys.